Sid Krofft is the grandfather of puppetry. He picked up his first puppet at a young age and was soon a sensation, booking shows across the United States and then around the world. He would go on to create such shows as H.R. Pufnstuff, Land of the Lost, and Sigmund and the Sea Monsters, to name a few, but his love of puppetry was always at the heart of all he did. I chat with Sid Krofft about his career in this special episode of Under the Puppet, produced for the National Puppetry Festival in partnership with the Puppeteers of America. You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. Welcome to the show that is preserving puppetry through the personal stories of professional puppeteers. My name is Grant Pachoco, and this is Under the Puppet. Well, Sid Krofft, it is an absolute pleasure to get to talk to you at the National Puppetry Festival. You are the grandfather of puppetry, and I am so excited to explore your incredible career through puppetry. And just thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
I mean, this is the biggest honor. This is coming from my heart because you got to remember, everybody out there, I started just like you did as a little kid, 10 years old, making a puppet out of a sock. But I didn't. I bought my first puppet because I saw my first puppet act. I was 10 years old in a vaudeville theater.
Do you remember what that act was and what you saw
on
stage?
Of course I do. I remember everything about it. But what's really, really blowing me away, and I'll get back to the story, is that I absolutely love all you puppeteers all over the world are out there, because I really have not talked directly to you. And this is such an honor for me. And for you to hear a little bit about my story, because my story would take months to tell. The very first movie, the week before, that I ever saw, I was just turning 10. I was invited by the man, the stagehand that opened and closed the curtain. That was his job. And it was the opening show at 8 o'clock in the morning. I got there at 6. He snuck me into the theater. People had been sleeping out in the street all night. There was a line for blocks and blocks. And it was The Wizard of Oz. Can you imagine? My very first movie. I never saw a full-length movie. I came from a really poor family. And so, movies on Saturday morning were 5 cents, but that was a lot of money,
Right.
I loved Lifesavers, and they were 5 cents. And my dad said, that's the most expensive candy. I was invited by that same neighbor that opened and closed the curtain. A week later, he had one ticket to go to the Phase Theater in Providence, Rhode Island, to see a vaudeville show. He thought that would be really interesting for me, because even at 10 years old, I was already living in the world of fantasy. They loved where my head was at 10. And so the reason he wanted me to see that show, because it was the Meglin Kiddies. That was a woman that had 100 children. She discovered Shirley Temple and Mickey Rooney and all the kids that were in movies. And she had a live show, and they built a theater here on Hollywood Boulevard across from the Chinese Theater. It was a vaudeville theater. And it's now called the El Capitan. And so they thought it would be interesting for me to see other kids entertained. I was alone. My dad asked a couple to bring me in. And he was going to pick me up after the show, the stage show. And I was sitting next to this couple. I didn't even talk to them. And the curtains went up, and there was like 30 kids tap dancing down a staircase. And it was wild. To this day, I don't know how the hell they did it. but sparks came from their tap shoes. You know, I've asked so many special effects people how they did that. They think it was sandpaper spread across the staircase. And that ended. I never saw anything like it. And there was a spotlight with a little suitcase in the middle of the stage. There was a kid, but I don't know how old he was, in shadow. And the suitcase opened, and a little clown peeked his head around, and the music, just music, was playing. He got up. I never saw a marionette. So immediately at 10 years old, I thought it was real, a little real person. And it stood up on top of the suitcase and it blew up a balloon. And the balloon broke. And the clown became so sad, he dropped his head, that I started to cry. It was sold out. And everybody screaming, shut that kid up, you know. And the ushers came down the aisle. They asked the couple, is this your kid? Can you shut him up? And they said, no, we just brought him into the theater. They threw me out. I never saw the end of the act. I sat in front of the theater, crying my head off for that clown, waiting for my dad. People walk by. Should I call the police? Where's your parents? You know, I couldn't even answer them. A few days after that, every day there was a kid that had a 5-cent Superman comic book. It was the very first comic book. We used to look at it page by page. I don't know if we could, well, I'm sure we could read, but we looked at the pictures every single day. Never turned to the back of that comic book. But that day I did, and there was a marionette, a hazel marionette. All you puppeteers will know that name. It was $3.95. And I went to my dad and I said, can I get that? And he was furious with me. And he said, you're a boy and you want a dolly? That word dolly stuck in my mind my whole career. And then he said, $3.95, it'll feed our family for weeks or a month or whatever it was. Also in the same magazine, there was an ad, if you sent away for 100 Christmas cards and sold them for 50 cents, you could keep a nickel. I didn't tell my parents. I sent away and ran down every day for them to arrive. And after school, this is in July, I used to go into the streets with my blanket and my Christmas cards spread on the ground, selling my Christmas cards so I could save $3.95. I know it took from July to Christmas to save that money up. I got the puppet. Guess what her name was? Dolly.
Dolly, yeah.
I still have her. She's 83 years old in my position. Oh, maybe she's older. Now I became a street performer because now, self-taught with my little dolly, and that couple upstairs for Christmas gave me a little Victrola that you wound up. And I swiped one of my mom's records that she loved, a singer. I went into the streets every day, and guess what? I made 30 cents a day. And then on weekends, as much as maybe 75 cents. And my dad, I went to my dad, they had no idea I was doing it. And I said, I have $1. And he, where did you get that from? From that day on, I started supporting my family. I still do. I'm 93 years old. And that never went away. And my dad became my manager about 2 years after that. And he allowed me to get better puppets. Because I don't know if you know this, but there was a magazine, all you puppeteers out there. It was called Billboard. it wasn't music. And it came out every week. I never bought it. I used to go to the newsstand and write down the information that I needed on a piece of paper because I think it was a dime, and that was a lot of money. And so there was an ad in this magazine for marionettes. I mean, a professional one, close to a 3-footer. And I got my first 2 marionettes, and they were tap dancers, and they were all dressed in white satin top hats, and they were black, which was unheard of, displaying it to white people at that time. I started putting together an act.
Can we talk about that act? Like, what was it? Just songs like you had seen in that show, or was it skits?
No. Everybody out there, and you can relate to what I'm saying, all you puppeteers. We're like magicians. We have our secrets, on how we make things work. We don't really share them once it's like it's yours, it's something that put a stamp on your name. And so I knew nothing about show business, but being a street performer and then putting an act together, it might have been, my act was probably maybe 7 minutes long, maybe 3 numbers, maraca, opening girls with maracas, and the breakaway skeleton, of course, that was like a huge success in my act, but I did it totally different than anybody. I had to figure out on my own, the clown blowing the balloon. I always hated that tube going down because that's obvious that the puppeteer is blowing air through the tube. And later, I had a marionette actually lit a cigarette and inhaled and out, exhaled. And it was all with a little lung inside of her chest that I built. And so when I talk about creativity, I was never, hey, you guys out there, and I'll admit it, you're hearing it from the horse's mouth. I never felt that I was a great puppeteer, but I still am the greatest showman because I did it all. I was in vaudeville, I was in burlesque, I was in the circus when it sat 15,000 people in the big top. But I wasn't in the big top, I was in the freak show. That held 3,000 people as the world's youngest puppeteer. And guess what? My banner was way at the end, because what the hell was I doing in a freak show with puppets? But I found out years later, they kept sending me out all day long. It's a 12-hour job. You do a show every hour on the hour, or when they get to your stage, because we sit on these 6-foot or higher stages. So 3,000 people, they're standing in dirt and mud and whatever. And, looking up, they have to see everything. And no one ever spoke, but I had my music on a little tape recorder. There was a minstrel 30-piece band in the sideshow, and I never had them play my music. If anybody ever saw that piece of footage, which was done in 1952 or 3, when Madame Chikanashinska was a ballet dancer that I had. She was a retired ballet dancer. And on the Jack Benny show, it was a special, an hour special. Jacques Tembois, who was the premier dancer in the New York City Ballet, danced with her. I worked her from 12-foot a bridge, and he did lifts with her. And I just, after all these years, I didn't have a copy of it. Someone sent it to Kelly. Kelly is my creative assistant. She's been with me a long, long time. And it's because of Kelly. I hope you're all watching me on Instagram every Sunday. I hope so. And if you're not, you better be. It takes a hand to hold a marionette that weighed a lot, right? And you only have the other hand to pull the strings. And 12 feet in the air, when you pull a string, and I drove Judy Garland crazy. She used to stand in the wings and watch my act because I don't know if you guys know this, but you have to be almost a little more than a half a beat when you pull a string because it takes that to go down and give you the movement. And if you want the movement right on the note, and it drove her crazy because I was totally off beat working if you watched me up there. So here I am with Jacques Dembois doing lifts and I'm by myself. I don't know why, and I don't know how I did it. So when you look at that, all those lifts and, I mean, marionettes don't register on film very well because they become a little jerky, and that's what the Muppets did. Oh, the Muppets, they're the most incredible. What happened when the Muppets came on the scene opened up our entire world. Thank you, Muppets. And Jim Henson, who I really knew well. And of course, Brian, who's going to be on my show in a couple of weeks.
So, you're performing at in the circuses and vaudeville and all these other places. When did you start using the unusual artistry of Sid Krofft?
1945. I lived in Providence because I come from Canada. I was born in Montreal. And we came here, our whole family, to America the very first time, the summer of 38. And we were supposed to go back to Providence. We lived right on the beach, $20 or $25 a month in this little house. It was a servant's house, but it was smack on the beach. And there was a hurricane, and we were the only family on that whole big long street that made it. Everybody drowned, or it was one of the great East Coast, never registered, but the winds were 160 miles an hour. Now we're going to New York. We're moving to New York, and we're going to live in the Bronx because we had relatives there. And my little agent in Providence hooked me up with a two-bit agent in the Brill Building on Broadway. And I went with my dad and my Victrola and auditioned in his office, which was no bigger than a bathroom. And when I was done, he said, okay, I like what you just showed me. The very first thing is I am not going to be able to sell a puppet act. That word puppet is not going to work. How old am I? 15. Yeah, I'm 15 years old. And he said, that's the first thing. You've got to come up with something. At 15 years old, I don't know where the hell I got it in his office, because those are big words. I said, what about the unusual artistry? He said, oh, bingo, that sounds great. That's mysterious. Because even if I have 8 by 10 pictures, I want them to be mysterious too. And I have pictures like that were taken at that time for that agent. He said, your name will not fit on a marquee. You are not Tchaikovsky. It went way beyond that, my real name. And my real name, first name, was Sidney, which I never liked. But I didn't have people call me Sid. But that agent said, look, we'll take your first name, and out of your name, how about Krofft? Krofft. And I said, it's not big enough. Let's put an extra F in it. Right? And so that year I became an American citizen, and I changed my name to Sid Krofft. My family, when I was in Europe years later, they all decided, without even asking me, my whole family, including Marty, his real name is Mortimer, and took my name, Krofft. Not only did Mortimer take my name, he also took some of my old puppets. He was not a puppeteer, knew nothing about it. He was a car salesman for 2 years. That was his first job. And he took my old music, and I already had a huge reputation all over the world. And he put an act together and he got jobs. But I was in Europe all through most of the 50s, the early 50s.
It's little brothers always are touching your stuff, right?
That's a whole other story. Okay? That's another show.
Right. Well, I think you've already answered this. My next question was kind of how long it took, doing these shows, I guess, sort of locally before you were touring.
Well, I'll tell you what shot me to puppetry stardom.
Okay.
I'm doing vaudeville, one-nighters with my act. I'm too young to be in burlesque, but I wasn't allowed to take a bow. I didn't work on a stage. I worked in black, and I moved like a dancer, and I moved like the puppet, above me. So it just all stayed in line. And so I covered Radio City Music Hall. Can you imagine a puppet act at Radio City Music Hall? Okay. Next door to Radio City Music Hall, the sister theater was called Center Theater. There was a Broadway show there for 10 years that changed every year. It was the Sonia Henney Ice Show. Huge, 150 people. It was just like Radio City Music Hall, which this theater sat 4,000. Radio City is 6,000. So I see an ad for an ice show. They're looking for a novelty act. I can't even stand up with shoes, forget ice skates. But down the street from Radio City Music Hall on 9th Avenue was Madison Square Garden, the original. And in the basement was an ice rink open to the public. And they had sessions there. My other brother, I have another brother, he's still with us. His name is Harry. He was an ice skater because he used to play hockey in Montreal on the street because the streets were frozen. So he went with me. I went to the manager and I said, in between the sessions, and I would never say anything like this today, but do you know who I am? I'm Sid Krofft, the unusual artistry of Sid Krofft. I probably said something stupid like that to him. And it's insane because I couldn't stand up with a marionette. I mean, forget without a marionette, because they'll throw you totally off balance. And I just don't stand in one place. I have to dance with my marionette. And I'm not a dancer, but I moved like a dancer. And so I was dressed all in black, but like a bullfighter. But it was all black. There was an audition 3 or 4 days later. I could stand up, but I really couldn't stop or go forward and stop. And I definitely couldn't go backwards, which I needed to. And if I'm going to dance on blades, I didn't know this, just like my puppetry. You don't dance on blades, you dance on the teeth of the skate. I never knew that. But I ended up dancing on the blades. The ice skater, Sonia Henney, said, how the hell do you do that? You've never fallen? Yeah. And so I auditioned in a dark theater, and all my marionettes were on this rack, and I had something to hold on to. And I pushed the rack out, and a voice said, it was Sonia Henney, I couldn't see her, and the directors and whoever. She said, did you give your music to the pianist? And I said, the pianist? I have big orchestras play my music, you know, and let me explain my act to you. And I said, this is my opening number. And I went through it and they said, thank you very much. You know, you'll hear from us, or whatever that line is that you've seen in many movies. And I didn't even tell my dad I did that, right? Because he wouldn't have liked it. A week later, I get a phone call, you're opening in 3 days on Broadway, a Broadway show. And we are offering you, now I might be wrong. It was more than $125 a week. And I opened an opening night, of course, all the critics are there. And Brooks Atkinson, that they named a Broadway theater, was the critic for the New York Times, gave me the headline of a show that was so big and so spectacular. And you can look it up. It says Sid Kroft's strutting puppets are masterpieces, because they never saw anything like that on ice. That show ran for a year, and that's what opened the floodgates for me, because then I was offered every ice show on the planet, because now I became an act that nobody on the planet had ever done for an ice show. And oddly enough, talk about timing, all the hotels that had showrooms were turning their dance floors into a little ice rink, and they put on a little ice show. So I was in demand all over the country, because that was the big thing. Hotels, the Hilton hotels. If you played in a Hilton hotel, you were a star. That's where Liberace started. And I played all those rooms. And then I was offered to go to Europe at the Lido for a year. And then I did a command performance, 3 minutes, for the Queen. Liberace was the star of 100. It was a night of 100 stars. And it was a charity for the Queen. And it happened every year. Someone fell out in the afternoon on Sunday. And I got a phone call. Liberace said to the producer, oh my God, Sid Krofft. Oh, get him. See if he will do it. And they called me around 2:00, and I grabbed a couple of puppets, because you can only do 3 minutes. And I did a command performance for the Queen. And she came backstage, and we all lined up, all 100 of us. And she had a lady in waiting behind her. And the lady in waiting told her who everybody was. When she got to me, she said, oh, what cute little dollies. Well, I heard my dad's voice, and this is going to sound awful, but I almost gave her the finger, you know. And so I wouldn't even be here talking to you today. I'd be in the tower in chains, you know, if I did that. But, you know, that rang. I hadn't heard that word only way back when I was 10 years old.
You almost caused an international incident, Sid.
Oh my God, a puppet act. Okay,
Yeah.
let me throw this in. David Copperfield, who is the world's greatest magician, he started with a dummy. Then he got into magic. Magic was backyard birthday party. A magician came and showed the kids a little trick, and they oohed and awed. So he brought it into the adult world. Can you imagine, at my young age, I knew I had to be different with my puppets. There were puppet acts out there, but I was taking over, because I got jobs, unusual artistry jobs that they were not doing, you know. I was the first puppet act at the Lido in Paris. I don't even think they ever had a puppet act at the Night of 100 Stars or anything like that. You know, I caused a lot of attention, but I wanted to take it into the adult world. Nobody had done that at that young age. And so my act, which toured all over the world, I went to Egypt, the height of my career, because they never saw anything like that. And I don't take full credit for anything. It takes an army of creative people to help you with your incredible ideas. You know, people have always thought I should be in a straitjacket, you know.
Let me ask you about you talk about it takes an army, and you also mentioned that you had people build puppets for you at this time when you got that big. Were you still building your own puppets, or were you having other?
I don't even know how to draw, but I
Okay.
am painting right now. Mushrooms. Okay. And little paintings. Yeah. And I'm pretty damn good at it. See, there are things behind our walls that we don't even discover, and maybe we do before we leave the planet. You know, I always tell actors, go to class, and cold reading is the most important thing because that's where you wrap it up. You know, you got to be able to look at a script, memorize it, go in and kill it, you know. And if you didn't get it, it's because they weren't looking for someone that looked like you. And just keep going. Don't let anyone ever talk you out of something that you love doing, ever. You know, I've been tried to be talked out. When I got back from Europe, I couldn't even get a job because I was gone too long. They had forgotten before I got Judy Garland in that same period. And so guess what? I was hanging it up. And I was going to be a butler because I wanted to live in a house. And I thought, gee, that would be great. I could live in, that was my dream because I always lived in the crappiest hotels. I ate the crappiest food so I could send money home because I was supporting. And so don't let anyone on this planet say, what do you do? I mean, my dad first said, you're a boy and you want to play with a doll? You know, I mean, that's like sticking a sword into you because you found something that you love, you know, and that's what started my career. And I can do nothing else. And I haven't in all these years. This is my 83rd year and I'm still working. And boy, wait until you see, hey, puppeteers, you're going to see something coming down the pike real soon. And I know Grant got a little peek, but since you got a little peek, it's even gone 100% further. You know, it changes and shifts, but that's how our careers are. We're in construction. When people ask you what you do for a living, tell them you're in construction, and then they always say to me, "Oh, are you I don't know, a bricklayer or a contractor?" No, contractor. Yeah. I said, no. My life.
To get back to that question, can you talk about some of the builders who built some of your puppets over the years?
Yes. Frank Paris.
Frank Paris, yeah.
Frank Paris, who built Howdy Doody and one of the great puppeteers. As a matter of fact, he got an engagement in New York. I used to always play with my act, the Latin Quarter. That was Barbara Walters' father. That was the big nightclub in New York. And that's where I met so many huge stars because I was in that show and they always had me back because it was such a big success. But Martha Raye was the star. That's where I met her in 1952. And we became great friends. And that's a whole other story. She became Bonita Bazaar, Boss Witch. And I had to almost break her arm to do it because she said, that's going to end my career to do a little kiddie show. Well, it still lives on. And I miss you, Martha. She was, oh my God, greatest lady. Okay. So, the beautiful Balinese dancers that opened up my act. And I had a tandem, I always, or even when my act closed, I always close with a big black number. And I always told a story. They never spoke through music. The music was almost 99% of my act. Orchestras, I played the Hollywood Bowl with Madame Kikanishinska, with the Philharmonic, because she danced at the Hollywood Bowl. A marionette for 16,000 people, with Johnny Green conducting because of the music. The music was killer of my act. Henry Mancini's arranger wrote my music. All those things, every detail. It's like the Muppets, the detail. Cirque du Soleil, the detail. They spend 2 years before you see a show. The makeup, the costumes, the movement, the picture. No elephants. You don't need any of that. Nobody ever thought of that. I saw them out in the street in Montreal. They were street performers.
Let me ask you about your act at that time. And you talk about working on things before they go into the act. Did your act have like removable, swappable pieces where you could do one thing one night?
I was locked. I did 4 numbers and an encore. There were 4 numbers. My act was about 18 minutes long. It moved like a bat out of hell. The opening was mind-boggling because I worked 3 marionettes at once. It opened up, this is really important. I never allowed an announcer, or what we call an MC, to introduce my act. Whoever I followed, black out the whole stage. There'd be a mic off stage, and a voice would say, in the dark, the whole theater was pitch dark, ladies and gentlemen, the unusual artistry of Sid Krofft. And I traveled with this huge, huge gong. I bought it from the Paris Symphony Orchestra when I was in Paris for $200. And they would hit this gong, it would vibrate the whole building, and my act visually would start. And on stage, I had this Balinese masked, beautiful figure that also hit the gong for the second time. I had little set pieces. I traveled with an assistant who in 1958 was my brother. He would put props in the dark, but hand me all the puppets off stage, or maybe it would happen in the middle of the stage. So I always had a formula. I had a big opening number, and then the second thing was Dracula, flying over your head, over the whole audience. And there was a coffin on stage that was lit. And he'd fly into the coffin, and he had a big sword, and it was real corny as hell, and he sunk down into the coffin, and the whole coffin would burn on stage.
Wow.
And out of it would come a skeleton. But the way I did my breakaway, it was show-stopping, because at the end, when he went back in, and you guys can steal this, when he went back in, all the bones were scattered, and his hand went out and grabbed one and the other and the other and the other, and then he shut the lid. And that's how it ended, And I got to tell you something. I still have nightmares to this day because it always took me an hour or more to reload my act or restring or untangle. I'm one of the greatest untangler on this planet, and I always in my dream, I never can make the curtain because I'm not ready. I always had that fear, what time is it? What time is it? What time is it? And I had to change strings because my strings wore out, even though I don't know what the weight was, 100 pound or whatever the hell it was, but they wore out because they took a lot of abuse. And then I had this beautiful costumed Pierre Balmain. Do you know who that is? The
No.
biggest couturier in Paris, Pierre Balmain. He did the costumes for my puppets. They were wearing $3,000 gowns and furs, and I mean, it's a gimmick. You got to have a gimmick. Music, costumes, and no job to the audience. Okay, so anyway, she was beautiful, and she had this beautiful makeup mirror with all lit up, and she took her hat off. She put it down. She had the beautiful big hat, and she left it. She took it with her hand and left it. So I had to release that string, right? And then she took her beautiful coat, her lined in chinchilla, and put that on. And the music was just beautiful. And then she kept on dressing herself 9 or 10 times. She turned into a stripper, right? And it was hot, and, and then at the very end, the last thing she did was take her bra off, but immediately blackout. She hardly got to see her boobs, right? She did her bumps and grinds, and when I look at her, she wasn't that beautiful of a puppet, but I was in burlesque, I worked with Gypsy Rose Lee, who was, Gypsy Rose Lee. That's the movie and the Broadway show called Gypsy. She was the #1 stripper. I saw Sally Rand, but I never worked with her. With the feathered fans. You're going to love this. I'm in Beirut after my engagement in Cairo. And I'm in a club called the Kit Kat Club. And it's just Arabs, because I didn't want to play for the tourists in Europe. Yeah, and at the Lido, yeah. But I told my agents, wherever you send me, I want to play for the people. And so there was a stripper. She was the star. She was from England, and her name was Miss Pamela. Miss Pamela was in Les Poupées de Paris. Not her, but the puppet. I love that name. And Miss Pamela traveled with a woman that made her costumes out of crepe paper, beautiful gowns. And that was her act. She ripped pieces. She had a lounge on stage, and she put all the pieces there. And at the end of her act, when she was totally stark naked, she picked up all those pieces and made a big ball out of it and opened it up, and it was a huge rose. And that's how her act ended. So she said to me, I always wanted my nipples to light up. She said, we've got to figure out how you can do that with your puppet. My puppets didn't have names, but they knew me because I took good care of them. Every night, they went to bed in their beautiful sacks and everything. One of them caused almost to burn down a building. I lost her. Her cigarette lighter opened up in the middle of the night.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and I lost her completely. But they flew in her stand-in. It happened in New Jersey from New York, and the show must go on. She said, all you have to do is drill 2 little holes, and we'll get a little flashlight bulb and a real thin as thin as your strings. We'll paint it black, and and you'll have a battery up on your control. And at the very end, blackout after she takes her bra, and they just flash the nipples 3 times. Right. And I said, I'm game for that. Okay. So we did it and oh my God, it was the hit of my whole act, the flashing of the red bulbs. Right. And then I always closed with a huge black number. I had this, it's all music, on stage was a phone booth, and this guy, black puppet, came out in this big hot car, and he went to the phone, went into the booth, and supposedly he's calling someone. And then at the other side of the stage, I'd leave him in there, I'd hang him. And on the other side was a lamppost lit, and a streetwalker, black, beautiful costumes, with furs and all that stuff. And she had a cigarette lighter, and she lit it. There were times when it wouldn't light. Yeah, very few. It was pretty accurate. So I had a cigarette lighter, and I would put my hand down and light it for her. And I discovered something, because as you all know, as puppeteers, it just takes a couple of minutes with a marionette, and your focus, they become, life-size. And if a human hand comes in front of a marionette, it pushes the audience backwards, like, whoa, And so, because in Les Puppeteers, I didn't have her. I had her lighter, but it never worked. So one of the puppeteers from the wings, because that was even made it more sensational, would light it for her. And she dropped her furs and drugged them in this hand. And what my puppets really did, and what I honestly take credit for, they knew how to walk, not as a marionette. Because remember that review? Sid Kroft's strutting puppets are masterpieces. That's what he meant, because they walk. She met the guy. I put them tandem, and and they did this big hot dance together. And then I had, like, I don't know, a 15-piece black band, and it was all, electric, all puppets, but not manipulated, like they were in a nightclub dancing. That's the way my act ended. I never had an encore. There's one thing we all know. Again, you can relate to what I'm saying. Puppets, kids, and dogs always stop the show. All three. Always. That's why Judy Garland picked me out of thousands of performers. And I did stop the show for her. And then she came out right after they didn't even announce it. They just played 4 bars of Over the Rainbow, and she walked out. And so that is a big piece, and the most important piece of my career is puppetry, because puppetry gave me the ideas of putting people inside of suits. I did that in my puppet shows. Did anybody out there see one of my puppet shows at Six Flags? 9 years, a new show every single year. Mind-blowing, 25 minutes, acid trip, because I was working for teenagers. They want to go on those rides. They're not going to go see a puppet show. That's for their little 8-year-old, 2-year-old brother. But they stood in line for 4 or 5 hours trying to get into a 1,200-seat theater. We did 9 shows a day. I had 2 crews and 12 shows on weekends at all the Six Flag Park. We were in Kings Island, and we were in Busch Gardens.
And some of those teenagers grew up to they're working as puppeteers to this day.
That's right.
Yeah, so you
Yeah.
really provided a lot of first jobs for a lot of
Well,
puppeteers.
when I came to see you, by the way, everybody, I saw something. I I just saw something. It's just weeks ago, and thank you for inviting me. I've been wanting to see it. Brian Henson has a show, Up It Up, and I've heard about it, and it's for adults, and it's improv. And when all the puppeteers heard that I was there, I was so honored. That they all got so excited about it. But I got to tell you something. What you guys did, the improv, you know, there we go. Brian went left, didn't he? He went left, just like I did. Just remember that, everybody, because that's an important path to take in your career. And it just blew me away. And I learned something from everything that I see, everybody I talk to. I absorb every word. I'm working on a project right now, and I'll say, well, let me think about it, an idea that somebody else. And then I come back just hours later, and put that together. That's where the harmony comes. You can have a great idea, but you need a lot of creative people to put it up on that stage.
Yeah, well, and you certainly you assembled a good crew, and back doing those theme park shows, you had a lot of great puppeteers who worked for you. And Les Poupées de Paris was I can't even begin to think about how many puppets were in that show.
250. It was the biggest puppet show ever produced. The idea came to me because I worked at the Lido. It's an ass, they called those shows. I worked in the Folie Bergère, and Judy Garland opened at the Flamingo Hotel in Vegas. And the maitre d', if a maitre d' comes to you, if a busboy comes to you, if a waiter comes to you and says, hey, kid, that's a good act. That is the biggest compliment, because every 3 weeks, every 4 weeks, they see it all the stars, all the acts, and they've seen it over and over and over again. The maitre d' came to me and said, I've been here for a zillion years. I want to open up a restaurant, a dance club, and a theater, a puppet theater. And I want all those three things, a mini little Disneyland. And I found a location here in Los Angeles. And I said, but my act's only 18 minutes long. No one's going to pay money to see that. I'm a supporting act. They come to see the star. He said, no, you'll come up with something. I woke up, it might have been days later, and I thought, oh my God, adults only, a puppet show for adults. There's not going to be F jokes. I'm not going to do anything like that. And tits and ass with puppets, right? That's what they call those shows in Europe. And I thought, oh my God, who can I get to build all those marionettes? I worshipped to this day Tony Urbano, the most brilliant, not only puppeteer, brilliant beyond belief, but Tony Urbano, he was sent to us from the gods of the puppet heaven, He's just unreal. And he was living in San Francisco, and I called him. I said, I've got this crazy idea. I've got the money to do it, whatever it costs, he said. And so Tony came here with his aunt, who did wigs, and he opened up a little shop, and he built 250 marionettes. That show was 58 minutes long, no intermission. It was mind-boggling. It played to 9.5 million people at the Seattle World's Fair, the New York World's Fair, the San Antonio World's Fair, off Broadway, on Broadway, Las Vegas for years, a puppet show. But you had to be 21 and you couldn't bring your kids. But at the New York World's Fair, the president of the fair made us cover the breasts on all the puppets, only the breasts, because all the showgirls and whatever, unbelievable costumes. Bill Campbell, who was working in a costume rental. He wasn't even designing costumes at that point. That's the kind of people I found. All those puppeteers you talked about, they were all kids. They were 18. You had to be 18, at least 18. Maybe some of them were even 17. I just met one in Dallas, and he said, "You sent me through college." I was at Six Flags for 9 years. He had some of the original tapes. I did the music off of records. I put the whole show. I spent months. I directed them. I created them. I swept the floors during rehearsal. I did whatever it took. I strung with everybody. Because as you know, as a puppeteer, you're just stringing your life away because I'm demanding. Oh no, the puppet can't do that. I said, yes, it can. We're going to make it do that. Oh no. I always get, my stage manager would say, you can't drop that into the audience. They'll pull it out of the ceiling. I said, if it sucked, they'll pull it out of the ceiling. They'll have respect if they like it. They're not even going to touch it. I said, I want it to touch your head. And it was a huge octopus that picked up a kid, a shill in the audience, and brought him into the stage, an octopus. Yeah. I did all those effects. And the Lido used to come to see Les Poupées de Paris to steal, which I stole from them usually, my effects. Because I did a number, you're puppeteers, you're going to love this. It was a jungle. And the whole stage was a swimming pool, real water. The floor came up and it was an angled mirror so the audience could see the water, right? And there were 2 elephants on either side. Big waterfall, the whole stage, real. Everything was real water. And the elephants out of their trunks poured water into the swimming pool to give it movement. The whole stage was a Venetian blind, all painted gold filigree with a beautiful, beautiful piece of art on it. And the Venetian blind, the audience would open and you were looking through the Venetian blind. The Lido stole that idea, but that came from Les Poupées de Paris. You know what else came from Les Poupées de Paris? Love is a Bore, written by Sammy Kahn, Jimmy Van Heusen, was Barbara Streisand's first hit. She sang Love is a Bore that Pearl Bailey puppet sang in, and it's on her People's album. And of course, I know a lot of you have the Les Poupées de Paris album. That was the first time original music was written for the New York World's Fair. But the president made us cover the puppets till 5:00. And then at 5:00, we could take the bras off. And we got so much publicity from that, just boomed our business.
The 5:00 show was always packed. Line out the door.
Yeah.
Well, Sid, it has been a pleasure talking to you. I mean, we could, as you said, we could talk days for this, but we've already talked for quite a bit. Before we wrapped up, I did want to ask about your Instagram live streams, because as you say, you're still going and you're doing these live streams.
Well, you know what? All you puppeteers out there, and please tell your friends too, everybody that's tuning in, because I know people that tune in that have no clue who the hell I am, because the other day in front of 1,000 people, they introduced me and I took the mic and I said, every single one of you has a phone. Would you show me? And, and everybody put their phones up. I said, you should do this every day. Call your mom or your dad or go to your grandma or your grandpa and ask them if they know who Sid Krofft is. They're going to tell you. Because when I do lectures at theater art departments at universities, those kids have no clue. Maybe they knew Land of the Lost because of the movie, but they had Donnie Marie, they don't even know who that is. And so just call your parents. And they all did in front of me, I said, because I know you're wondering who this old guy is. What the hell, what? But for those people that don't know who the hell I am, you're going to hear these kind of stories. Because you know why we did it? Kelly talked me into it. I told you about Kelly. And it's Kelly that said to me, you've got to share your stories. You never have. I haven't written a book. The reason I did it, because if you can just get one thing from me, one story, and use it for your career, your ladder that you're climbing, then I've accomplished something, haven't I? And that's my journey in life. So go for it. Absolutely go for it. And watch me on Instagram. And there's my phone.
Well, Sid, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Well, thank you. I hope I shared something with all of you out there. I've had a huge career and I love all of you so much. And thank you for listening to my crazy story. It was fun doing this.
Many thanks to Sid Krofft for being on this episode. For links to Sid's Instagram and some of the other things we discussed, check out the show notes for this episode number 86, over at underthepuppet.com. I'd also like to thank Dustin Curtis, Kelly Killian, the National Puppetry Festival, and the Puppeteers of America for their help on this episode. I'd also like to send out a special thank you to all the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who help make this show possible. Patreon patrons at the producer level and above who get a special shout out are Eve Cunning, Kathy Crawford, Andrew Calcagno, Tony Urbano, Brandy, David Akers, Paul, Scott Armstrong, and Vicky Sebring. To become a patron, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. And thank you for your support. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. If you have questions, suggestions, or feedback about the show, call our voicemail line at 818-806-9604 or click the Call the Show button in the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android. You can also send your feedback via email to underthepuppet@gmail.com, or you can connect with the show on Instagram or Twitter by searching for Under the Puppet. And don't forget to tell a friend about the show. This episode featured music by Dan Ring and was edited by Steven Staver. Thank you so much for listening. Under the Puppet is copyright 2023 Saturday Morning Media, Grandpa Choco executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com. Under the Puppet proudly presents The Adventures of Timmy the Tooth Reunion. In this almost 90-minute video, you will hear great stories from the cast and crew who brought this amazing puppet show to life. Plus, you'll see never-before-seen artwork and exclusive behind-the-scenes video. Under the Puppet's Timmy the Tooth Reunion is available right now at timmy.underthepuppet.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.